guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I'm going to be talking about some adult fantasy books that are on my radar. So over the last few years, my buying habits have changed tremendously. When I started my channel and when I started collecting books like prior to my channel, I used to pretty much exclusively buy secondhand books with the occasional new release. So the method of buying books that I had was if I was interested in it, I would pick it up. If I was interested in the series and I saw like book 4 in a charity shop, I would pick it up even though I didn't have book 1. So moving on a little bit, when I started to run out of space, I stopped doing that and I started prioritizing book 1 in a series. So I had and still have book 1 in tons of series, and I would not buy any of the sequels until I'd read that first book, which makes a lot of sense because like, what if I hate book 1 and don't want to continue with the series? What's the point in me having like book 4 and book 8 and none of the ones in between to start off with? But now I've just stopped. I've changed my buying habits quite a lot. I'm not really buying books, and if I am buying books, it's because I plan to read them immediately or in the very near future. As I mentioned, I already have book 1 in tons of series that I want to read, and I do honestly and truly still want to read like 95% of the books that are on my shelves, but that does not stop me thirsting after other books. This video is just going to be a real cathartic thing for me. It's kind of going to be like come book browsing with me, because I'm going to be talking about 10 adult fantasy series that I really want to read, but I don't need. I'm not gonna buy, but I really want to read them, because I know if I bought book 1 in any of these series, it would just sit on my shelves for like another 12 months at least, so there's no point. But I still really want to read them. So we have a bit of a mix in here. We've got things that I've seen in like my library, we've got things that I've seen in the bookstore way back whenever the last time I went to a bookstore was. There's a couple of like really well-known, like the more classic, high regarded fantasy series on here, and I will say that I don't know too much about them because with fantasy I always find the synopses really hard for me to process without the context of actually at least reading a little bit of the book to get a good deal of what it's about. And as I mentioned in a video that I did recently that was talking about fantasy as a genre and subgenres and things like that, a lot of what a series is actually about has nothing to do with the first book. So when you get past that first book, like the initial synopsis of the series is pretty irrelevant, but I'm gonna do my best. I have done one of these videos before. I think I did one in like November. That was a whole range of genres, but right now I'm just really in the mood to sink my teeth into some adult high epic fantasy, which is what has kind of prompted me to make this video kind of specific. Although I will say I have just started The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson, so hopefully that need will be sated soon. So the first one we have is The Boneshard Daughter by Andrea Stewart, and this is the first book in the Droning Empire series. So this one takes place in an empire where the Emperor's reign has lasted for decades because he is a master of the forbidden art of bone shard magic. So our main character in this series is his daughter, and the Emperor's reign is starting to crumble. There's a revolution rising and the Emperor is refusing to recognize his daughter as the heir. So to gain his respect, I guess, or to prove that she's worthy, she also sets out to master the bone shard magic. However, when the revolution ends up at her door, she has to decide how far she's going to go for her country and her people. I think this is the one that I've seen most commonly in bookstores. I usually see it at Waterstones. It just like jumps out at me. There is something about this that just seems really appealing. You may notice as well, because a lot of these, aside from the ones that are like well-regarded fantasy, are all ones that have stuck in my mind based on the cover. They're not even, the covers of the books I'm going to talk about aren't even that similar, but you'll notice, I guess, that I prefer particular styles of covers over others. But yeah, I have nothing to base my want for this series on other than the fact that it keeps jumping out at me every time I see it. Like my eye is just drawn to it and I really want to read it. I haven't even heard anybody review it, but I want it. Another one that I have Waterstones to blame for is A Ruin of Kings by Jen Lyons, and this is the first book in the A Chorus of Dragons series. So this one sounds real interesting to me for one specific reason. This one follows a bastard orphan called Kiran who has grown up on stories of like long lost princes and dragons and quests and all of that good stuff, and then he's claimed against his will as the long lost son of a prince, but he quickly finds out that being this long lost prince that he's kind of dreamed about and read about his entire life isn't exactly what he thought it was going to be, and a lot of the tales that he's read are very, very untrue. And aside from that, he is not destined to be the hero of the story. He's not destined to save the kingdom. He is actually destined to destroy it. So we have many themes in here that I really like. First off, we have the storybook stuff with like him being raised on these tales. So I feel like the lore and the storybook tales are going to play a big part in this series. And then we also have the main character who's not destined to be the hero of the story. He's destined to destroy the kingdom. You guys know that I love my morally grey characters. I love my villains, and I don't know which way it's gonna lean. Like, I don't know whether he's gonna fight his destiny to destroy the kingdom or whether he's just gonna like burn it to the ground, but I definitely want to find out. An author that I really want to read from is Robert Jackson Bennett, and he has two series that I know of. The first book in one of them is Foundry Side, and the first book in the other one, which is an urban fantasy, I think, is City of Stairs. I don't necessarily have a preference which one I read, but based on the synopses, I'm leaning more towards Foundry Side, which is the first book in the Founders trilogy. And the reason for that is that just based on the synopsis of the Founders trilogy, it seems to have more of the tropes that I love. Like, I believe that they're both kind of urban fantasies, really, as they're both set in city locations, but I think City of Stairs is more like real advanced technology, while Foundry Side has a little bit more of like the classical fantasy vibe that I typically read, although I haven't read either of them, so I may not be making any actual sense. But Foundry Side follows a young thief called Sancio Grado, who's supposed to be like one of the best thieves in the realm, and unbeknownst to her, her latest target that she has been sent to steal is an artifact of unimaginable power that could revolutionize like the magical technology of this world, leaving the people who control the city with a lot of power that could be incredibly damaging, as they would assume like total control of the city using this artifact. Because of how powerful this artifact is, the people who have tasked the main character with getting this artifact have now decided that they want her dead. So she has decided, one, that she's gonna run for her life so that she doesn't die, and two, that she actually wants to stop this transformation that is going to occur when the bad people have the big bad powerful artifact. Honestly, the real reason I want to read this is just because I've heard excellent things. It's been a while since I've heard people raving about this series, but it is one that's been in the back of my mind for quite some time. From people talking about it, like I can't even remember what it's about. The information I've just given you is from the synopsis on Goodreads, but I don't think I've actually heard a bad review about this, so I'm real excited about it. This is one actually that could lean slightly into young adult. I believe it's adult. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a possibility that it could be young adult. The next one is another one where I've been drawn in purely by the cover, I think once again from Waterstones, and that is the Bone Ships by R.J. Parker, which is the first book in the Tide Child series. Now, the synopsis of this one does not give very much away, but it is once again to do with bones. So maybe bone magic is something that I'm particularly interested. I think like bone magic alludes to some pretty dark stuff like necromancy and all of that stuff, which actually thinking of it, I haven't read a necromancer fantasy anytime before. I don't think. I do have the Rinchpeko one, is it the Bone Witch, which once again, bones. But yeah, I think it might be that nature of bone stuff that I enjoy. I need to stop saying bone. But this one takes place somewhere called the 100 Isles, and it is about two nations that are at war. They have always been at war, and traditionally they make their ships from the bones of dragons, and dragons have been gone for a very long time. However, the war has still persisted, with neither side really coming out on top. However, one day a dragon is spotted, and both sides spy the chance to have the war tip in their favor, as whoever wins the dragon will win the glory and also win the war. As I mentioned, something about this cover is just really drawing me in. It seems as well that I quite like books set on the sea. Like, this has ships made out of dragon bones, especially like the live ship traders. I have been looking for like some high fantasy pirate stuff as well. If you guys have any recommendations recommendations that's like in the spirit of Pirates of the Caribbean and how pirates are portrayed, and with like the epic plot, and it's like a little bit fun with characters that you can really root for, but not like cheesy and not YA. So if you know any adult epic fantasy Pirates of the Caribbean-esque pirate stories, please drop them in the comments, because that is a niche that I've been looking at, and everything I've been finding, it seems to be more like historical kind of stuff, which I don't mind a historical setting, but I would much rather have like a high fantasy setting with that Pirates of the Caribbean spirit without like it being watered down, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? If you have any recommendations, just let me know, please. The next one I've heard absolutely nothing about, and I've only ever seen this book and other books in the series in one specific place, which is my library, and that is The Curse of the Mistwraith by Janny Wirtz, which is the first book in the Wars of Light and Shadow series. So I have never ever seen these books before, aside from in my library, and my library has like a regional chain, so I can go to many different towns within my region, use all of the libraries, and all of them have multiple Janny Wirtz books. And I've never heard of this author, I've never heard of this series, but this cover, something about these covers just look like something that I'll really enjoy. And I do believe that Janny Wirtz also co-authored books with another author, and that author's series, I can't remember who it is. Can I find that? Raymond D. Feist. So Janny Wirtz has also written books with Raymond D. Feist, who is another author that I actually want to read from, but they have an extended universe and everything's really complicated. I'm not sure if Janny Wirtz books are an extended universe or whether the Wars of Light and Shadow is just like its own thing. Regardless, I'm interested. I'm interested mainly because I keep seeing them in my library, and my library does not have like a super large fantasy selection just in general. So I'm really curious what it is about Janny Wirtz that has her books in my library system. So this series takes place in a world called Ethera that is in eternal fog, because there is a malevolent mistwraith that obscures the skies. Our two main characters in this series are two half-brothers, and I'm gonna have to read this because of the fantasy names, but one of them is Arathon, who's the Master of Shadow, and the other one is Lysia, who is the Lord of Light. The synopsis talks about like fate playing a big part in this, with the two main characters finding that they are inescapably bound inside a pattern of events dictated by their own deepest convictions. And there is also a group of sorcerers called the Fellowship of the Seven who have something to do with it as well. So sounds like your like classic high epic fantasy good stuff that I really enjoy. If you've read Janny Wirtz, then please let me know if you would recommend, because like I've heard nobody talk about Janny Wirtz ever. It's just my library just has so many of her books. Bit of a change of pace, and one that I'm not sure whether it's young adult, and I want to read this one purely because I've heard excellent things about it on BookTube, but that is Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse, which is the first book in the Sixth World series. Now I was previously interested in this, but it's not my typical like favorite type of fantasy. So I have also been interested in Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse, and I've been asking people who've read both like what should I start with, and everyone kind of said like they're like just whatever you want to. There's no particular reason why you would pick one over the other. So I think I'm gonna go with Trail of Lightning just because it was written first, but this is different for me in style, and it's different to everything else mentioned in this video, because this is a post-apocalyptic Native American fantasy where gods and legends have been reborn, but so have monsters, and we are following a main character who is one of these gods slash heroes of legend and a supernaturally gifted monster hunter. Now from that synopsis, as you guys will probably recognize, not my usual, not the type of thing that I usually want to reach for unless it's like heavily romantic themed as well, which I don't know if this is, but I've just heard so many good things about this. I don't think I've heard a bad thing about it. I've heard some pretty mixed reviews for Black Sun, but most of those have been good as well, so I just need to read something by Rebecca Roanhorse, and I usually like to, if I'm interested in an author's earlier works, I do kind of like to work in chronological order. One that synopsis always kind of escapes me and I really struggle to get a grip on it, but you are going to see immediately probably why I want to read this, is The Shadow of What Was Lost by James Islington, which is the first book in the Licanius, I want to say, series. This looks like a Sanderson book. It looks like it has the same color palette as well as like the Stormlight Archive, and the initial synopsis of this reminds me a little bit of Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. Now that being said, that is just like what my brain goes to when I look at it, which is probably a conscious choice from the publishers and like the marketing team surrounding this series. But aside from all of that, I've heard really good things about this, and this has actually been recommended to me. Lots of people have said that they think I'm gonna like this book, but I can't down, get a grip on the synopsis. So this takes place 20 years since the end of a war where a very powerful race of gods who used to rule the world or the kingdom or whatever have been wiped out after their powers failed them, and it's that bit that reminds me a lot of Elantris. But in the aftermath of the war, the normal people who ruled under these gods that have abilities that is known as the gift have narrowly escaped being wiped out with the gods by submitting themselves to the rebellions for tenets. This is why I struggle with fantasy synopses, because of all of the like very specific contextual fantasy language that is included in them that I don't have the context for. So our main character in here is a gifted man called Davian who is suffering the consequences of what happened with this war and what happened to the gifted people as a result of it, and he is in, I think it's going to be like a magic school, but the people there are treated more like prisoners than as actual students. So it also says here that the main character discovers that he has the ability to wield the forbidden power of the Augurs, and he sets into motion a chain of events that will change everything. To the north, an ancient enemy long thought defeated begins to stir, and to the west, a young man whose fate is intertwined with Davian's wakes up in the forest covered in blood with no memory of who he is. This also sounds like one of the high epic plots where it's kind of like very much the initial setup, and by the time you get into the series it won't actually be about anything that's really mentioned in the synopsis, because the story will kind of just go on its own path. So I want to read this because it's been recommended to me. I want to read it because it looks like a Sanderson book. That is what immediately draws me to it when I look at it, and also the reasons like where I came across this book. I have seen it on BookTube, although I wouldn't say it's extremely popular. Like, it's pretty well known, but it's not one that everybody's heard of. And I've also seen this in Waterstones when it was first released, and I was really intrigued. But adult fantasy hardbacks, because of the size of them, tend to be more expensive than standard hardbacks. And at the time when it was released, which was like what, 4 years ago or something, 2014. So in 2014 I was a broke ass bitch and I wasn't paying that much for a fantasy hardback for a series that I'd heard absolutely nothing about. And to be fair, in 2014 I wasn't even reading adult epic high fantasy anyway, so if I had have picked it up I probably would not have been able to understand it. One that is incredibly popular that a lot of you guys will probably know of if you read adult fantasy at all is the Black Prism by Brent Weeks, which is the first book in the Lightbringer series. The only reason I don't already have this is because I have a lot of the like core adult fantasy series, like first books in series on my TBR that I want to get through before I move on to some others. So like I've got The Eye of the World, I've got The Lies of Locke Lamora, I've got The Name of the Wind, but this is like high up there on one that I will probably get to once I've cleared through some of the ones I'm already working on. Like I'm working through the Cosmere and Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings at the minute, which leaves me little room for more real chunky fantasy. Before I looked at the actual synopsis of this, all I really knew about it is that the magic system in here is dependent on light and possibly color as well, which is just the basis of the knowledge that I had for this series. But the synopsis says that the main character is a guy called Guile, who is the Prism and the most powerful man in the world. He is also the High Priest and the Emperor. However, it also says that prisms never last, and Guile knows exactly how long he has left to live. So when he discovers that he has a son who was born in a faraway kingdom, he must decide how much he's willing to pay to protect a secret that could tear his world apart. Considering this is such like a well-established fantasy series, I'm surprised that it only has like a 8-line synopsis, but that's enough to have me intrigued. And regardless, this book's reputation already precedes it, so I'm gonna read it at some point. This is one that I will say that in the course of my lifetime I will definitely get to. It's just gonna be a matter of later rather than right now. One that is completely Ashley from Frolic Through Fiction's fault is Master of Sorrows by Justin T. Call. Now, myself and Ashley have interesting tastes in fantasy because our tastes match up perfectly sometimes and are completely opposite in some areas. So the general distinction between our tastes in adult fantasy is that I tend to like more grimdark, like the real gory, bloodthirsty, deeply morally grave, villainous, stabby kind of fantasy, and Ashley likes the real like whimsical fairy tale-esque fantasy that I don't read as much of. I think that this one is a political fantasy, which we both tend to line up on, and she read this book and loved it, so I'm assuming that I'm going to as well. And it is the first book in the Silent God series. It is a relatively new release. It was released in 2019, and I believe that the sequel has either just been released or is going to be released very soon. Okay, so I've literally been taking this on Ashley's recommendation. I've never read the synopsis of this before, but the first paragraph on Goodreads already has me intrigued. I'm just going to read you the first paragraph and then I'll start paraphrasing. But it says, "You have heard the story before of a young boy orphaned through tragic circumstances, raised by a wise old man who comes to a fuller knowledge of his magic and uses it to fight the greater evil that threatens his world." Already intrigued, already want to read this. Oh my god, the next sentence. "But what if the boy hero and the malevolent threatening taint were one and the same?" I shouldn't be doing this because this video is supposed to be a cathartic, like I want to buy these books but I'm not going to, but I really want to buy this book now. I want it right now. What if the boy slowly came to realize he was the reincarnation of an evil god? Would he save the world or destroy it? I know I said I was going to paraphrase throughout the rest of this synopsis, but it just gets better with every single line that I read. So the main character in here seems to be a warrior thief. He was born in a small village, was believed to be executed, and then he was raised by the people who killed his parents. So this seems to be like a kind of dark fantasy. We have a morally grey character that's torn between being the hero and being the evil guy. He was raised by like a priest-like person who actually killed his parents, and throughout the course of this he has to choose between this person who raised him and bestowed him with all of this knowledge and the masters of the academy that he attends. He's a warrior thief. I want to read this book. I want to read this book right now and I can't, and I'm hoping that when I finish with this video, when it's filmed, when it's edited, when I posted it, the synopsis for this book is going to leave my mind, because there are so many things in that synopsis that I love, that you guys know that I love. So maybe actually this video was a bad idea after all. Oops. And the final book we are going to be talking about in this video is possibly different again, because I found this through Feb, which was a month-long fantasy romance like event readathon that happened in February that I hosted a couple of author interviews and events for, and that is Song of Blood and Stone by Elle Penelope, which is the first book in the Earthsinger Chronicles. So I'm going into this book thinking that it's fantasy romance. However, the cover of this book and the synopsis of this book gave me major like epic high fantasy vibes, so I do think it is a little bit of both. I don't know how far the fantasy romance element of it is going to go. Like I don't know how romantic it is going to be, so I do feel like it belongs in this video, but just so you know, I am expecting this one to be heavily romantic as well. So this is set across two kingdoms that have been separated for centuries by a magical veil. However, now the veil is starting to crack, and the leader of one of the kingdoms, who is a powerful Earthsinger, has found a way into the other kingdom where he is going to try and seize power. So the main character in this one is also an Earthsinger, but she just wants to live a quiet life on this little farm in a village. However, a group of spies, I think from the enemy country, wander into the valley where she lives with a spy from her country, and she is then discovered and thrown into like this tense political thing when she's found out that the veil thing is cracking and that the world could be thrown into chaos. And I think the romance is going to be between her and one of the spies. Sounds interesting, because maybe like a little bit of an enemies to lovers vibe in there as well. This book I had seen prior to Feb as well and was intrigued by the cover, but had never heard anybody talk about it. So if anybody's read this one, let me know what you think. But that was actually the last one for this video. So this video can also serve as a little bit of a trash my TBR, where if any of these books that I featured in this video you think I'm not gonna like for whatever reason, or you've read them and you really didn't like them, then please let me know down in the comments. Also, if there's any of these books that you've really loved and you really want me to read, then let me know as well, even though it's gonna hurt me and lead me into temptation. Yeah, please do that as well. But I hope you've enjoyed this little cathartic books that I would buy if I was buying books but I'm not buying books because I don't need them kind of video. Like I said, I've already done an installment of this in like November, so I will probably do one in the future. If there's any particular genres, like oh maybe you guys want a fantasy romance one that's just all fantasy romance books that I would buy if I was buying books but I'm not, then let me know that in the comments as well. But aside from that, I do hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please don't forget to like if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find links to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye.
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're will go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.